Ladies and gentlemen, it is scientifically proven, in fact, to be your friend, Mike Brady from Oceanliner Designs. Waiting in the wings, we've got our friends from Titanic, Honor and Glory, but it's good to see you all. And I thought what we'd do is something a little bit different this time. We've seen a lot of first class, and I thought we should see a little bit of second. Well, why don't we board Titanic, and we're checking out second class. Gents, second class on the Titanic is often overlooked. Why do we think this is?
Well, without getting too political about some things, it's the middle class, being in the middle, or I guess I won't call it being a political statement, but imagine that you have an older sibling and a younger sibling. Being the middle child, you often just get ignored because you have the one that is special, that came first, that gets all of the attention. First class with its beautiful accommodations, that you have the rich people, the famous people. And then you have third class. You have the stories that are supposed to be more heart-grabbing. The poor immigrants going to the new world who have some of the worst luck with getting the chances into the lifeboat. So this kind of, in this Venn diagram of being on board Titanic, you have second class, and so it kind of just gets like your attention gets grabbed one direction or the other, and you just miss the middle of the ship, which is second class.
Yeah, I think it's just a big part of it is just this such a need to focus on the stark difference between, first and third class. Like, oh, look at first class, they're all in their pajamas and then with their paneled rooms. Look at third class, they're, I don't know, drowning or locked behind gates or whatever. It's the narrative thing with all stories that people like to write about Titanic don't leave a lot of room for nuance, both even within like the depictions of first and third class, but they certainly aren't going to mention second class. It's not convenient to the story.
Where we are at the moment is a really interesting little promenade. It's an enclosed promenade. Second class passengers could board Titanic from a number of different ways. So where we are right now is about level with the ship's aft mast, the main mast, behind the fourth funnel. Now, was this a main boarding point for second class, or was this kind of like a secondary? Because I can see we've got big gates here for getting on board.
Yeah, this is one of the main hubs for second class to board the ship. They have that famous Father Brown photo of Titanic at Southampton, and I think looking down the port side of the ship, I want to say that this area, those doors that are yours on my screen, I think there might be a delay. You look down, one of those doors those shell doors are open, and those gates would be swung up.
So they could just walk straight in, and they're confronted with quite a nice little cozy space. Now, I know we had a bit of a list of places that we wanted to go visit that Carl had put together. And Carl actually wanted to start on the boat deck. So shall we just walk in here and stroll on up real quick?
Oh yeah, we'll head up to the top, head up to the boat deck out on
And
deck.
make our way down.
Another interesting thing also about second class is that it was nice enough that my understanding is that there were a lot of people who easily could have afforded first class, but they preferred to travel in second. One, to save money, and two, more, maybe a little bit more laid back.
You wanted to start here, Carl. We're at the aft end of the promenade deck. What's special about this place for second class?
Honestly, not much. It's just it was.
Don't be mean to second class.
Well, they did have a good view above first class, and first class.
Yeah, they can look down at their uppers right here.
Ooh.
This is what we always talk about, how weird it is.
Yeah, I've just walked over to that point where you can look down at first class, and
and they could look up. I mean, it's basically first class was sandwiched between second class, and that's very funny when you think about it. Especially when you consider that, they apparently did not like that. And of course, this aft section of the boat deck, they had lifeboats took up this area. You had a lot of benches and stuff. The kennels were back here. There's a door on the back of the fourth funnel deck house, and it's got little bars on it.
Yeah,
and
I'm just
that's
walking
where they
up
kept
there.
the dogs. Of course, you've got the fourth funnel up here, and if you wanted to go to the top, there was another door in this deck house. I think it was I forgot which side, the starboard side.
Starboard
There was
side.
a fan. Starboard side, yeah. And there was a fan room, and from that fan room there was a ladder in you that would take you up the funnel.
Actually,
Of course, that's
climb up.
not in here in the demo. So you on top of the second class staircase deck house, there's this smaller kind of structure, this little thing with a couple of doors in it. That was a room holding the motor for the elevator for second class. Second class, of course, just had one elevator. First class had the other three.
What was unique about that? I mean, not many ships even had elevators at the time, right? So what's the significance of giving this to second class?
Well, they overused that to death. Well, not really, not to death. Well, I mean, the ship did sink, but it was quite popular. Ironically, the elevators in first class were not in a good spot forward of the grand staircase. They were often overlooked, but since second class only had 2 stairwells, and this was right in the center of the main stairwell, which was perhaps a better place to put a elevator akin to, I believe, Lusitania, Mauritania, where you walked around your elevator to get up and down the ship. Your decks. This was something that everyone was waiting for all the time. So the elevator workers were definitely, or the single elevator worker on duty was very often busy. And that was just a young lad who I believe Lawrence Beasley once asked, why aren't you, do you want to go play deck games or something like that? He was just a child, and he was like, I'm not allowed to play deck games or anything because this, he's on board the ship to work. So
He was on the clock.
that was his duty.
I might go and have a quick look at those elevators now while we're talking about it. Beautifully wood paneled, little call button showing the deck indicator panel. And there's an interesting little quirk here, right? Because the stairs, we're on the boat deck now, but the next deck we can leave from this staircase in second class is not the deck below, which is A deck.
No second class allowed in A deck, pretty much.
Straight skips it. So this is A deck, which we're walking down now. I know you can't, there's a slight delay, but there's a frosted window,
Yeah,
so you can't even look into any first class spaces here. So we're now at the B deck landing, and this is actually where we started out a little early, very close by where we started out. This is a deck above, so we're directly on top of that boarding point for second class. So tell us a little bit about this little space. It looks very cozy. We've got some nice little wicker chairs, and maybe the room that is directly in front of the staircase here at the landing.
It is a cozy little spot. The forward B deck landing of the entrance, or the second class entrance, what we call it on Titanic. When we talk about these spaces, we have to always make sure we're saying this is the second class entrance, first class entrance, third class entrance, etc. So indeed, the second class entrance, forward B deck, this area right here, you can imagine passengers on their way up to the smoke room or the promenades here. If they're going down, they're waiting for that elevator that's very popular, would be sitting in front on one of those wicker chairs, or if they're just conversing and having a conversation, perhaps. These little entrances and halls were considered to be a meeting spot before going about your day. And it's handsomely outfitted with the same type of oak wood that you'd find throughout the entire ship. The same oak that would be in first class was also used in the paneling in second class. So this is that same cut of oak, and you'll find that as we go into the smoke room as well.
What's
and
interesting?
Because you're on an entrance in the staircase, you'll find clocks throughout the ship and on most of her entrances. So here in this landing of second class, right in front of the elevator, you'll have a clock, just like on the forward grand staircase and the aft grand staircase in first class on Titanic and Olympic. You have so many clocks, including the honor and glory clock, because knowing what time it is and on board ship, because you're so busy just sitting around reading your books or just people watching or conversing, you got to know what time it is before dinner.
Super important. Super important knowing what time it is, where you're going. They would set the clocks back as they're going westward, I believe. And so the clock system is really interesting, because the way it worked is they had a master clock on board the ship, I believe, and then they were all electronically powered and connected to this master clock, and the other clocks throughout the ship, is that right, were essentially running off a circuit and timed to that master clock's time.
There's other clocks aboard Titanic that were not on the system, but this clock, which is for the passengers' use, is wired to the ship's main system and would not have to be adjusted every morning by a steward, unlike certain other clocks.
Opposite the elevator landing, it's interesting. There seems to be some of the paneling here has actually got locked cupboards. Do we know what was kept in these cupboards?
Right here behind there is basically the ship's main electrical fuse box paneling, all right here throughout there. So if you open up all those panels, you'll have like tons and tons of fuses and switches for, we think, a lot of second class. It's up for debate actually what's really behind there. We just know it's the main fuse board, because above your head you'll see two thick wooden beams, which you think are decorative, but they're not decorative. They're actually hiding all of the ship's electrical cables and wiring.
One of the reasons this is even located here is because pretty much directly below this area is the ship's main switchboard and the electrical generation plant, the dynamo room. And there are all these wires and stuff that came off the dynamos, and they went to the switchboard, and everything got kind of distributed from there. So yeah, it all came up from there, and it would have went through this area to the rest of the ship, pretty much.
Gee. Not probably somewhere you'd want to be during the later stages of the sinking, I would assume. So we'll walk aft, and we'll head into this beautifully decorated room, which, again, is one of those things where it just looks as good as any other first-class liner of the time, and maybe slightly, the generation slightly before Titanic. That staircase is so similar to other White Star liners like Oceanic and what have you. Where are we right now in this beautiful kind of green-themed room?
This is the second-class smoke room. Now, every class had its own smoke room. Third class had their smoke room, second class had theirs, first class had theirs, and the officers did too. In fact, didn't the engineers have their own smoke room too?
Mm-hmm, they did.
Everyone had to have their own little room for smoking. Yeah.
Almost everybody.
It was a big deal back then, chewing tobacco. I mean, we've got spittoons on the floor. It's just one of those bizarre little cultural nuances that's kind of gone now, but back then in any bar, you probably would have found spittoons lying around so people could spit out their tobacco, right?
Oh yeah, it's disgusting to consider, but there's spittoons even in some of the crew working areas, such as in the mail hold. We've seen pictures of in other ships in the mail holds. You'll find. I bet there were some throughout Titanic and places that you wouldn't want there to be, such as the officers' cabins, perhaps. Even though it wasn't allowed during their duties, according to the White Star Line handbook for officers, but it was quite a common thing back then, much more than it is now, as it's luckily gone out of practice.
You see these elsewhere as well throughout Titanic, but the call buttons seem to be everywhere. So there are these little, I think it's a Bakelite button in a brass fitting. I'm not sure. You might correct me on that, but they seem to be strategically placed. Yeah. What really, realistically, say we were standing around having a cigar, why would I be ringing this call bell here?
For this room, you'd be wanting the smoke room attendant to come to you and order another drink, pretty much. You don't walk up to the bar and say, "Barkeep, I want to order a whiskey and on the rocks," or whatever. You have to, at the bar, at the long bar, and they give it to you, whatever, you create a tab. You sit down, and the bar man comes to you and offers a drink, etc. I mean, you technically could walk up to the attendant's window, because there is a Dutch door that leads to the bar. A Dutch door being not a window that was made by someone in who was Dutch, like myself, Matthew de Winkler, but a Dutch door meaning it has a bottom half that can, and a top half that are separate, and so it can open up and it can technically be a divider, which leads to the bar. But you ring the bell, or you just get the attention of the smoke room attendant and just either ask for the bar menu or just know what you want to order, and they will give it to you. And unlike what many people assume, you still have to pay for your alcoholic beverages aboard Titanic, regardless of class. Even first class, their alcoholic beverages were not free to just order whatever you want. You were given a little card the ship's name and everything. That kept your tab, and depending on when you want to, usually at the end of the night, you would pay the barkeep, and they would keep it in either a cash register or a safe in the first class bar aft of the smoke room. There was an actual safe, and all those records and the money would be then given to the purser, who would then put it in their ledger, which was a very important part of the accounting that was required for the purser and the storekeeper every night aboard the ship. And that's how you would enjoy your alcoholic beverages on board ship. So right there, yeah, this is how you would enjoy living the life of relaxation after dinner time with your mostly male friends aboard these ships. Ladies could still join you. Remember, we talked about that one of the last past streams. You know, these rooms weren't exclusively just for men. That's somewhat of a myth, but you know, it was still somewhat a taboo-ish thing for women to be in the rooms, but it wasn't totally like a segregated, like men only in these spaces. But they were catered towards the gentlemen.
Yeah, and on the point of the bars, it is one of those interesting little things. Is that, you know, it is very funny, because whenever you see like pop culture, very surface level depictions of Titanic, what do you see all the time? You see bars, you see people sitting at the bars, you see giant multi-level ballrooms and stuff like that. And like these ships Titanic anyway, didn't in Olympic, they didn't have anything like that. The closest thing to like a bar that you would imagine is maybe in the restaurant, and that wasn't used as a bar.
On that interesting thing, really quickly, I believe it was after the war that the concept of an American bar found its way onto some of these oceanic steamers, because while creating the THG deck plans, we looked at so many other ships that were designed by Harlan and Wolff, and I remember just seeing one of the deck plans that one of the researchers on Titanic Honor and Glory found. It was in one of the smoke rooms, but it was labeled American Bar. Not the entire smoke room itself, but just one little, like, you could tell it was a countertop, and it just said American Bar, and it was just labeled right there, and I was like, oh wow, look at that. So yeah, that was eventually, you know, it was, the concept of it was like everything else, as the transatlantic trade was dwindling down from immigrants coming over, and it was just, you know, it was evolving, was finally becoming something more popular. But the humidor, obviously in first class, where you know, it was catering to more wealthy clientele, you had an actual what was known as the cigar showcase, which was this large cabinet which was full of drawers of probably tobacco and other accoutrements of things that could be sold to the gentleman. On the top of the cabinet, under glass, was probably cigars, and a humidor where the men could look in and pick out which ones they wanted from the various, you know, Cuba or wherever cigars were made. I don't know. I'm not an enthusiast of smoking cigars, but there were cigar storerooms down below in the ship. So in theory, since this is a smoke room, any cigars that were, and you could order cigars there in the White Star Line bar menu that was offered in these rooms. The barkeep for this room, in his little bar room back there, his little office where all the alcohol is kept, they would be kept in that room, and when you ordered one off the menu, he would go back, bring out the humidor, open it up for you, and offer what you purchased. So it's not presented out here. It probably would be presented on one of the two sideboards as an option that you could look at and then purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's catch our breath out here on the promenade deck.
Now, of course, going on the promenade, yeah, it's kind of funny, really. Of course, you know, from here they could look up at first class, they could look down at third class, and there were a couple of hatches here. These kind of low things with canvas on them. That was the both of them were collectively, I think, hatch number 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, on that note, we could probably head over back into the forward staircase entrance where we'll find the elevator cab, and then we can head down to C deck.
Great, let's do it. So yeah, when we were just mentioning that there are two staircases right on top of each other, what's interesting about this one, the aft staircase, the one more towards the stern, is you've got a clock, you've got beautiful stairs, it looks like first class in another Oceanliner from the era, but sitting in the middle of it, you have the ship's mast, which is, of course, extremely tall and needs to then go descend into the superstructure of the ship to actually find its foundation. And it goes down from the deck here to the deck below. And it's in a very strange position because directly forward of the mast is a doorway, which seems unfortunately placed to my mind. I mean, it mustn't have been a big issue, but it just rings in my mind as something that surely Thomas Andrews would have been scribbling down and been like, Britannic, we have to change this, because it just seems quite funny. Because you've got a music stand here. The reason why this is important is because there are photographs of the band playing here, and you guys can talk to this, of course. But so this space is another landing. It's another comfy space. What would this area have been used for? You
got this piano right here. It's one of the two pianos for second class passengers. They could use it, but this is where the band would perform in second class. They would give concerts a couple times a day on a set schedule. The ship's main band here, led by Wallace Hartley, and later on in Olympic's life, because Titanic sank, I have to remind everybody that in case they forgot. This would eventually be the area where you could be dancing to the band's music when they would add a saxophone, a couple more instruments during the jazz era after the war. So this is a nice little dance hall for passengers as well.
Quick fun fact. I just checked, and apparently, at least according to our Britannic plans, Britannic would not have had that corrected. It had a central door in front of the mast.
And there's a reason for that, and that's mainly because Titanic sank. And they needed to have that watertight door added there.
And just for those who have been keeping track, this is where we boarded just a little earlier, this little interesting enclosed promenade. Second class originally had more enclosed promenade, of course, but it was deleted from B-Deck.
You said earlier, Mike, that this would be the area that second class would first walk into on the ship. So... Well, actually, the forward entrance would be, but as they're walking around, they'd be first introduced to the library, which we haven't gotten to yet, but they'd be seeing these entrances. This is their first glance at their home at sea for the next couple of days. So it's a nice introduction to Titanic.
It's a beautiful introduction. And of course, we're talking about second class being a central hub, and here is the elevator cab that we were talking about. No, with no attendant, so unfortunately I can't go up or down.
Maybe he finally is being allowed to play shuffleboard.
Playing some deck games.
First time. Yeah.
Well, shall we walk into the library then? And have a little look, because this is an eye-achingly beautiful room that looks weirdly not Edwardian, I do have to say. Very kind of Art Deco looking. What's this space all about?
I think in my opinion, I think it has to do with the use of the two different wood types. The dado, having the darker wood below, which is made of mahogany, and the lighter sycamore wood above. And with that contrasting use of the dark sycamore with the lighter sycamore wood is what really brings... I see the Art Deco feeling for those certain hourglass panels as well. So this is a striking difference than you see around the ship in certain classical rooms. For instance, like if you look at the first class lounge, because essentially this is a lounge, not just a library, but it's the equivalent of Titanic's first class lounge, where you'd go and you just read and socialize and play cards. This is what you do here too. You'd read, socialize, you'd write as well, play some board games. But that room in first class was decorated like Versailles with ornately carved woodworks in oak, and here you have this more modern looking room, with touches of classical elements. You have the small fluted columns in the windows with decorative leaves and floral garlands above. But it's a different designed room. It's much cleaner, and this is perhaps, I would say, my favorite room aboard the ship.
Wow.
For that
Big call.
reason.
It's got to be one of the few carpeted.
Comfortable.
Yeah, it looks immensely comfortable, and I was going to say probably like part of that is the carpeting, because weirdly people expect the ship to have marble floors or deep carpet, and a lot of it is linoleum and tiled, which I think is one of those things that people might get disappointed about. Were there many other
Matt, would you like
public spaces in second class like this?
No, not like this.
Yeah, this is Matt, the only carpeted second
would you
class.
like to talk about why they loved linoleum so much?
I'm fascinated by linoleum.
It wasn't because it was new. It wasn't brand new, as many people like to say nowadays. Linoleum was invented in the mid-1800s. I think it was 1860, I believe, and it was used in passenger ships for quite some time before Olympic and Titanic. It was just this nice invention for flooring that was rather robust, and it wasn't expensive. And the reason why we don't use marble on ships, we don't use stone in ships for the flooring, is because it's very heavy, and ships still need to be light. If you put a lot of marble on a ship, especially the flooring, and it's on the upper decks. Imagine if the grand staircase had an entire level of marble flooring on the boat deck. That will still add up to the weight. That's why a lot of the chairs are made of cane and wicker still. They were doing mathematical equations to make sure that their ship was not top heavy. They still do that today with these humongous cruise ships to make sure that they can equate the ratio of glass balconies to marble floors to make sure nothing is going topsy-turvy on there. So one of the main reasons why we have this cheaper, lightweight, linseed-made, almost organic substance known as linoleum is because it was, one, a relatively inexpensive material that they could outsource or produce themselves, and two, it was a light material that they could quickly install. Not because it was a luxurious brand new item that was revolutionary, and so they installed it all over the ship.
And this isn't your grandma's 70s kitchen linoleum, which is a plastic synthetic. Like, these tiles were heavy duty and thick and beautifully made.
Yeah. And they were well kept, and sometimes they were also more or less shellac, so they would have this shine on them when they were first installed. We can see that in a couple of photographs.
And of course, it's same for marble floors if they had it, but it's easy to clean. That's why they went with that kind of flooring in some rooms. But one other thing, Matt, because I'm not sure about this myself, because in the lounge and in here in the library, how did the thing work with books? If you wanted to read a book or check out a book, do you know how that worked?
Well, each lounge, or library, I should say, the library and the lounge had their own steward, and you would... Let me grab my book that I have from... Was it Oceanic or Celtic? I forget. I'm holding a White Star Line book. Obviously, these were taken off all the time from voyages, from passengers who, air quote time, forgot to return them. And they don't have anything in them that are like we have today in modern libraries, if anyone goes to those still, where they have the little card in the back where you stamp it and such. Pretty much, I believe it still would have some sort of card. But this one's from I'm holding a book from the Baltic, from the White Star Line library. And these books were just held stories that authors wrote, some famous stories, and they would be bound in the same binding that would say White Star Line. So they all look pretty uniform. That's why the books there all look like they're the same book, just copied paste, because that's the. I wonder if we have the correct. I think we do. We have the correct binding. There's a few variations of binding, but you could just go up to the library attendant and say, "Can I have a book, please?" He'd of course keep a ledger of which book was taken out, and by which passenger, and which cabin they were staying in, because he would want to have all the books returned, because like everything on board the ship, there has to be a list and everything has to be noted where it's at a certain time, and because it's all for the sake of making sure that the money is being tracked, because the books are part of the company's property. So it's still essentially a library system. And I don't know the exact like timeline you'd have, but I think you could take a book out for as long as you want, really, because they'd have a full library of books. And we have hidden there on the sides of the main bookcase, we just have drapes hiding on either side, but in the lounge here you could also purchase some other sundry items if you wanted to. I believe you could buy chocolates in the library here, as you could buy chocolates in the first class lounge. First class lounge had 2 little candy cabinets along the boiler casing aft, and exactly where you're looking, Mike, which is probably now in the past, there is a picture of Olympic, and you can see inside, you can just make out a box of chocolates and vases.
Wow.
For decorations.
Such a nice touch. Shall we descend to D deck and check out the saloon?
Oh yeah. Let's head down. We'll go through I guess we can go through the forward stairs and go down the deck.
Let's do it.
The deck.
So here we are. There's a little landing with the elevator here at the foot of the D deck stairs, and then we walk into again a very impressive room, but a very interestingly colored room with some interesting choices on tiles and things. Who wants to run through this? Because this is quite a unique dining saloon on the ship, I think.
At this point, they avoided the individual tables for a lot of the second class. So it's in this area, it's a lot more, seating-wise, is a lot more like third class, just with nicer chairs, nicer table setups.
Was this one of those things where you were assigned your seat for the entire voyage?
It is, yes. So you would be told ahead of time, pretty much like which table. Obviously, everything is numbered. You can see on the chairs the little ivory plaque, which would have a number. Everything's numbered here. The tables are numbered, so that you'd be told like which. You'd be given a card. I think you're still given a card when you go on a cruise today. You're told like which table you're going to be sat at, and you give your card to the main steward when you arrive at the dining saloon, and they'll walk you to your table and your seat, and you sit down. And then it's up to you to remember where the heck you're going to sit for the rest of the voyage. And so you make friends with your table mates, and hopefully you get lucky and you have a good group of people that you can converse with for the next couple of days at sea.
Was it the kind of thing that you could organize with the purser to get a different seat? You know, I mean, how flexible was this system, do you know?
It's very important. Depending on who you were in second class, you could complain a lot, and hopefully you can get something better. We've heard horror stories of it happening, of certain individuals just saying to their stewards, and then talking to the pursers, saying like, I don't want to be in this cabin, I don't want to be in this area, please just move me. And they're relatively flexible, especially when the ship is not overly filled up on the maiden voyage like it was. They obviously could be more lenient then, but if they have no choice, if there's nothing they can do, they won't do anything. In first class, depending on your prestige, who you are, there's a lot of variables that can change their tune, more or less.
Other than that, I think that's about it in the saloon. We could now head aft, and there are basically, the next 3 levels of the aft staircase, it's just stairs and corridors.
Oh, is this is second class, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All second class. Yeah. I was waiting for it
class-
to catch up a little bit. Yeah.
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 Now you can see
Yeah,
that
we
we're
got
heading
these
towards the
little,
stern of the ship because the angle now
It's
of
curving a bit.
the hull is
Oh,
beginning to cut inward, and it gets more and more severe the closer you get to the stern of the ship. But we were talking earlier about finding kind of sterile, Spartan, copy-paste spaces, and then walking into glorious Titanic area. And this has got to be one of those where you've just got pretty, bare, right? You've got bare ceilings, so that's just deck beams above. And then you walk into like beautiful timber paneling at the end of the corridor into the staircase.
Yeah, this is kind of like what we're talking about, how your average Titanic area is this tight, white, cramped space, and then suddenly you turn to your right, and then beautiful oak wood.
Lavatories here at the end of the corridor. Of course, we've talked about this as well in first class, but wherever you have passenger cabins, you have communal toilets. Because this was not the era of en-suites.
There's no second class cabin that has an attached toilet to it whatsoever.
It's just such an interesting kind of labyrinthine area, and kind of depressing, I guess, having an inside cabin in a space like this. But I mean, if you're sailing for 5-6 days, you'd be spending a lot of time out of your cabin, I assume, and that's why they have such beautiful public.
Someone should tell that to Mrs. Shelley.
Yeah.
Another thing that was is very weird about this space is that because we're on D deck, it's got these these disorientingly high ceilings. It's weird.
D deck was about 12 feet? I think I remember it was like one of the tallest decks on the ship, right?
10.5 feet high from beam to beam was D deck. So I can't tell you that in metric, everybody. I have to use American freedom units, but yeah, it's the tallest one besides the two public rooms on A deck that they made taller, the smoke room and the lounge. So it's just enormous, especially with these cramped corridors. You almost look like you're a miniaturized individual, like shrunk by a shrink ray in a skyscraper or something. You just look like you're in this weird dystopia.
We're on E deck and here we've got a very unfinished what do you call that? Enquiry office over here.
Yeah, the purser's office, right?
Yeah, purser's office. Yes, all that stuff.
This is where you'd sort out all your deck chair, booking a deck chair at the start of the voyage, your chits, dropping off valuables. Was it as... Oh, actually, here's one for you. Did it have pneumatic tubes to get to the Marconi office? I assume not, because this is a long way back.
No. Yeah.
Yep. None of that.
Mm-hmm.
Second class aren't that important.
No, they're not. Yeah, I think the jury's out if you could send a message from second class or not. Still, I think that's up for debates. I mean, obviously, money can buy you anything, but still, I don't think there was like a. There's three. There's 3 windows here, as you can see, like 3 areas for like transactions or. One of the last rooms we were talking about, we spent a long time talking about what happens at the inquiry office. Like, you walk up, you say like, I need to send a Marconigram, I need to deposit something into the safe, or I just have a question about deck chairs. And then you move to a certain window here, and so you have 3 main things that occur at that first class office. And here, once again, there's 3 windows where maybe 3 things could happen, even though usually from the evidence that we have in the one photo of Olympics, where we have passengers who are actually models posing, we have just one purser at duty, and I think 2 of the windows up and 1 of the windows down. I can't remember off the top of my head. So it's a much smaller office, and you wouldn't have that much activity. But you'd still have. There's still a large safe back there for depositing of jewels, because as Kyle said before, you have. It's a large group of people traveling in second class who would still dress up for dinner with their jewels and such. There'd be money that would be deposited, and you'd still have to get deck chairs. They'd still be wanting to exchange money for different currencies, and there'd still be the general shipboard requirements that would be needed for like a hotel type office, which essentially a purser's office is. It's the front desk, if you will, and this is one of the second class's front desks. There's multiple little like inquiry windows throughout second class. That's how spread out it is essentially for dealing with the second class passengers. You'll see a couple more of them.
Yeah, it's a ship is a functioning city. It's like a small floating town, right? It's amazing to think there would have been so many passengers. We have this tiny little area to service them. A few of the people have been asking about these fountains here.
So yeah, you'd find water fountains such as that. Couple of types. The cupless drinking fountain, and just a drinking fountain, which would require some sort of cup to fill up and then drink from. All connected to like water coolers or water filters. You see some in on the aft well deck. You see if any of you are modelers out there who are really detailed modelers, you'll see them on the aft well deck. There's just these two little. Are there two? I know there's at least one. There's a exterior water fountain, but we've noticed, thanks to Olympics piping plans and such, that there are water fountains spread throughout the ship, often on E deck, and several other places. Point being is that this is probably where stewards would fill up the water that would go into all of the other like folding lavatories for the passengers. Titanic's upper class, first class cabins that had plumbing, hot and cold, running tap water. However, there were so many hundreds of other cabins where they would have to fill up a chamber of water to allow them to have water that was flowing somewhat. And to get that water, they'd use either the service rooms, or they would use these little water fountains that were spread throughout the ship, and they would fill up the carafes and put them on the folding lavatories and say, like, this is the water that you use for filling up your tumblers and to drink, your glasses to drink from, and they'd cover them up. And again, if it's the middle of the night and you're in second class and you don't want to call your steward, or if you're even in first class, there's a water fountain on Titanic that's probably just right outside the elevator lobby. You could just walk up to it with your White Star Line glass and just turn the knob and fill up your glass and take a sip of water. It's essentially just an easy way for make sure that passengers get the required mental needs aboard the ship.
The idea
that's
of
what
running
you wanted
water.
me to talk about, Kyle.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think, because this is, again, just one of those things we take for granted. Like, we were talking about the clocks just earlier. And yes, the clocks do work, by the way. You can see we've got about just over 10 minutes of our stream left, according to this clock. But the idea of running water is just one of those things that we take for granted now, but 50, 60 years before Titanic, which is not long, you would have had massive casks that were in the hold of the ship that could spoil, or that, basically would have been filled by the crew and stewards and then dispensed that way. But on Titanic, you've got a very, very complicated freshwater system, saltwater system, hot and cold salt water, tanks for this, the pipes on the funnels that you see Titanic's funnels, and you see these big kind of like inverted U-shaped pipes running up most of the height of them, and that's to provide essentially just pressure from gravity to keep the water pressure up for these types of taps. It's just, Titanic, for the ships of this caliber were spaceships of their time. It's just fascinating. Lusitania and Mauritania were about 6-7 years older, and they'd done it back then. But it's just one of those things, I think, that marks out a ship like this as being so forward-thinking and surely revolutionary. I mean, it's just amazing to think of the jump in technology. But yeah, this is another kind of copy-paste passenger space down here on F deck.
Most of Titanic was copy-paste.
Yeah.
And just taken from other ships. Sorry, everybody. Few exceptions.
Well, there is a little service window here on the.
Yeah, that leads into one of the second-class steward's rooms. I think it's the assistant second-class steward, and it's just an inquiry office window. So many of the stewards for second class just had a desk, and for general questions, they had other duties. So this is probably open during certain hours when they were not attending to other tasks aboard the ship, just for the sake of, and also probably really efficient when the ship was at port and on boarding days. The steward would be having his office hours if he wasn't running around helping passengers to find their cabin and such. So this is one of the areas we'll find another one once we go further forward on E deck as well for the chief second class steward. So the main two stewards, their offices, the chief second class steward and the assistant second class steward, their rooms double as offices, which passengers could visit more or less.
That's cool.
Through these windows.
Oh, let's do it.
Yeah.
We'll head through those curtains you were talking about.
Wait, if you haven't head through the curtains yet, have you?
And I found my deck plan.
Just walked through
for that whole time.
Just that second.
Oh,
Did you want me to go back?
No, you don't need to.
Are you sure? It sounds like it could be a cool point.
Oh yeah, I'm always a weird completionist, so I was like, why don't we go up to D deck to the into the forward stairs and then go down, because it's weird cutting through these areas. But that's fine.
No, we
so
can
we
do
basically
it.
there would have been a section of corridor there, but it's not in the demo, so we put in that little shortcut.
All right, I'll do it.
button.
I'm walking through. I've gone back up to the saloon, and I'm going to walk to the forward stairs, and then we can go down from that way and make a grander entrance.
Oh, now I know what you're talking about. I was like, which area?
Let's do it.
Oh,
The
yeah.
tiniest little area. The dinky little space.
Here we are. There we go. That's better.
I love the little space on D deck where you for those stairs. They were always fascinating to me. You remember, Matt, when you had more fancy like pediments or something above the doors?
Yeah, I made it really super awesome in there. Now it's just plain crap. Story of my life with Titanic. I mean, they get fancy at first, and then we're just like,
So
too fancy. Like right here.
I mean,
So,
this
for
is
one
an
thing,
interesting
you-
space, hey? Because clearly this is another main entrance point on the ship.
Yeah, this would have been, I think, one of the lowest sort of main entrance for second class, and there's a thing on the ceiling there. It's I'm not sure what was our evidence for that, but
It's the 20-foot accommodation ladder, and it's stored above.
Yeah, so
So you can see the railing for
portable
the accommodation ladder is folded down, and essentially the way these work is you can actually rig them to the side of the ship and provide a ladder for people to get up and down.
And there's 100% evidence for that aboard Titanic, because the pulley to use that ladder is visible in photographs of Titanic leaving Queenstown.
And of course, they had to store it somewhere, so why not in here? And the last space to really see.
Oh, this is the chief second class steward. As I was talking about before with the assistant second class steward, you have his accommodations here: a bunk, a folding lavatory, a wardrobe, dresser, but he also has a desk for when he has to do paperwork and ledgers and such. But he has a window that he can open up and look out on and answer questions of a passenger passing by, or something like that.
This just seems nightmarish to me. Like, this is where the one time you get away from passengers, you fall asleep and you just hear, Steward, I demand a new room. I don't like it. It's too hot.
I'm sure there was appropriate signage of his hours somewhere posted.
Oh yeah.
They like to
Quick,
post signs
Mike,
like that.
let's get back up to the boat deck, get some fresh air, get out of here.
Yeah, let's get out of here. We've just emerged on the boat deck and we're looking down at first class and third class here, but it's a very interesting class, like I said, like we were talking about earlier, because it's so compact. It's everything you need is right there. It's extremely comfortable. I think you'd be very happy traveling on second class. And then at the top of it, you get this really beautiful open open promenade deck. And what's really interesting, I think, is that a lot of liners of the time had deck houses along here that extended basically to the edge of where the lifeboats are. So you had very little open kind of promenade space. But famously, Titanic had a lot of powered ventilators, so they could get rid of, the old style of vents that would kind of draw, fresh air down into the stokehold to the boiler rooms. And you get these raised roofs over spaces like the first class smoking room, which is what we're standing on top of now, that is accessible to passengers. And you have this nice open space where you can just lie down and relax. And you're covered in wires and there's lifeboats there and things like that. From up here, you get a very nice view of the ocean. And it kind of does a little bit, I think, to defeat that myth of they deleted lifeboats purely for a good view, because you have a good view of the ocean. You can see it from up here. It's fine. I think this is an extremely comfortable space for passengers, and being able to explore it like this is it's fascinating. All right, between you, the two of you who worked on the game, and maybe Jack, who's animated it a bit through his time, we'll go in order, but was there anything about Second Class in particular that shocked or surprised you while you were working on it? Maybe we can start. I don't know if you wanted to chip in. We'll start with, say, Matt, because he's an interiors guy, mainly. Was there anything about Second Class in particular that you just had no idea about, or just shocked you when you started out?
I thought it would be a lot easier and simpler to recreate, but then when you really look at it, it's just as detailed and complex as First Class, in my opinion. There's just the little attention to detail that they put into all these public rooms of the ship. Like the first, the paneling in the Second Class library, for instance. I got to see that paneling from Britannic in a private house before it was sold, and fondly looking at the carvings, not just the panels that we saw earlier that were the hourglass Art Deco ones, but the columns and the pilasters and the door frames, and seeing it up close, and it was so different than at the time we had just poor scans of photographs. You finally see, like, wow, there's so many little tiny hand-carved elements to each parts of the rooms that they had to essentially do in triplicate for the three sisters. And so I think while recreating Second Class, for me, it brought me more admiration for the craftsmen at Harlan and Wolff.
Well, that was a super enjoyable 2 hours. Gents, thanks so much for joining us. I think it was great looking into Second Class. We've had a great time in First, and there's still more of First Class that we have to check out. But I think we've basically come to the consensus that we'll do an episode probably dedicated to cabins in particular, because then what we could do is compare First and Second and Third in one easy episode. Well, thanks so much for joining us, guys. It's been great having you all. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, stay safe and stay happy. See you again.